fit the bill. And so, Jesus, I'm sorry to take your time. I'm sorry to even bother you with this, young man. It's not enough. It's not enough. And I believe we live in the same place, because I think there's a lot of people, even in our churches, and it's not necessarily that they're not willing, but somewhere along the line they've convinced themselves that what they have to offer Christ is not enough. It's not enough. Whether it's their talent, their ability, an offering, they've come to the conclusion that what they have is so small. In the great scheme of things, they don't matter. And what they have doesn't matter because it's too small. There's something I want you to consider. Jesus doesn't rebuke this kid's gift. I don't see anywhere in here where Jesus says that's not enough. Do you see it? I don't. In fact, 5 small barley loaves and 2 fish. Barley was the poor man's grain. It was fed to the animals. 2 small fish would have been what we would consider like a couple of sardines. It was a child's lunch. It wasn't even a grown man's lunch. It was a child's lunch. But Jesus doesn't look and say, we need more. He doesn't rebuke Andrew and say, why are you bothering me with this kid's lunch? That's not enough. He doesn't say any of that. We don't know this kid's background. We don't know this kid's name. But I'll tell you what we do know. We do know the kid was willing to give his lunch to Jesus Christ. We do know that. Some of you are thinking right now, I don't have much to give. Someone else can do more. Listen to me. God has never required equal giving. He requires participation. Participation. In fact, I think Jesus stood by the treasury and made an entire focus on a widow's mite in comparison to what the leaders were giving. And my point is simply this. God never measured your gift against someone else's gift or someone else's capacity. He desires your surrender. He desires your willingness. He only asks, are you willing to place what you have in my hands? I'm not asking you, he's not asking you to judge what you have or determine what you have is enough. Just put it right there, he says, right there. Just give it to me. The issue's not, is it enough? The issue is whether you'll let it go. Whether you'll let it go. Verse 10, he makes the men sit down. The need is clear. They're hungry. Everything is ready. And in verse 11, I think we see one of the most important phrases. In fact, I think the phrase in verse 11, this entire miracle turns on this one phrase. Jesus took the loaves. It all turns on that phrase. Every bit of it. At some point, that lunch moved from the boys' hands to Jesus' hands. It made a transition. And that changed everything. Because when you really consider it, everything changed when Christ took the lunch. This is when a small lunch became sufficient for 5,000 men plus women and children. It became sufficient when Jesus took. Listen, the miracle didn't begin with the crowd. The miracle didn't begin with the problem. The miracle began with surrender. That's when it started. What if the boy had kept his lunch? What if he said, no, it's mine. I don't want to give it up. It's all I got to eat. What would have happened? Well, there'd have been no miracle. There'd have been no multiplication. There would have been no impact. That lunch would have stayed small if Christ hadn't taken it. That lunch would have stayed contained if Christ hadn't taken it. That lunch would have stayed limited if Christ hadn't taken it. But I'm telling you right now, that when that lunch left the boys' hands and went to Christ's hands and went from feeding one to feeding a multitude. Write this down, I encourage you to. Unreleased resources never become multiplied resources. Unreleased resources never become multiplied resources. A lot of us today love the idea of missions, but unfortunately there are so many that have never experienced the reality of it. And the reason is because they never move what they have into the hands of Christ. They hold on to it out of fear, out of control, out of uncertainty, what's going to happen. I mean, releasing what you have requires faith, requires trust. It requires knowing that God can do more with it than you can ever imagine anyone doing with it. And He can do far more with it than you can if it stays in your hands. And that's the contrast. What stays in your hands stays limited. What is placed in His hands is unlimited in what it can do. Verse 12 and 13, what you give goes further than you can imagine, my friends. What did it go to? Well, what started out as a small lunch ended up being 12 baskets. They ate all. They were all filled. It was sufficient for everything that was necessary. No one left hungry. No one left wanting. And it wasn't just a few that were full. They were all full. Every one of them. Every person in that crowd was satisfied from a lunch that was barely able to feed a small boy. But when placed into the hands of God, it fed all of them. I want you to notice God's math. 12 baskets left over. That's God's math. You say, well, it doesn't make sense. It's God's math. God created mathematics. He can do what He wants with it. But that little boy, can you imagine what he experienced? I mean, there was more at the end than at the beginning. Because that's what happened when God multiplies something. Do you believe that boy ever could have imagined that day when he left home with his little lunch? I'm gonna feed 5,000 people today. My little lunch is gonna feed a multitude. And my point is this. That little boy didn't surrender his lunch because he knew what Christ was going to do with it. He didn't know what Christ was going to do with it. He had no idea what Jesus was going to do with it. He wasn't giving it for the purpose of receiving. He did not know when he handed that lunch over, there's 12 baskets coming back. He didn't know that. Christ didn't tell him that. If you give me your lunch, I'll give you 12 baskets to take home. He didn't say that. He gave it without knowing what was going to happen next. Let me say that again. He gave it without knowing what was going to happen next. And brethren, that's exactly what Faith Promise Missions giving is. You don't give so that God is a debtor to you. That's not the reason to give. By the way, God's never a debtor to men. Ever. You don't give because you can necessarily see the result, because you may never see the result in this life. That's not the reason you give. You give because you trust the one that you're giving it to, and when you put it in the hands of God, you know that He will do with it far more than you can imagine, even though you may never know what that is. May never know. You will never fully see what God does with your gift. You will never fully know this side of the judgment seat of Christ what God does with your missions giving. But He's going to do something with it. That boy didn't know that every person was going to benefit from his little lunch. He didn't know that. He didn't track the distribution. He didn't calculate the multiplication. He wasn't over there in the corner with a 10 key. Aha, aha, aha. He wasn't doing that. But he was part of it. He was part of it. And man, don't you know, he had a story to tell his kids and grandkids. Let me tell you what happened to my lunch one day. Don't you know he had a story to tell his parents if they weren't with him when he got home? When he walked up with people carrying 12 baskets of leftovers, and I'm sure that, what is this? You wouldn't believe it if I told you. You see, missions, listen, you may never meet the people that are reached with the gospel this side of heaven. You may never see the churches planted. You may never hear the testimonies. But God knows every bit of it. He uses what is placed in His hands, and He multiplies it beyond what you can imagine. I want to end with this thought. Jesus could have fed the 5,000 that day without that boy. I want you to understand that concept. He did not need that boy's lunch to feed those 5,000. He could have fed them in so many different ways, your mind can't comprehend every way He could have solved that problem. And my point is this. He didn't need him, but that boy would have missed being a part of what Jesus was doing. Can you imagine the testimony he carried as I ask? And the whole idea is this, brethren. The fact that God uses us is a privilege. It's a blessing. And the question is today, it's the same one I asked this morning, will you be part of what God is doing, or are you going to miss it? It's possible to be so close to a miracle and yet not participate in it. It's possible to hear, to agree, to admire, and still hold back. I think of Exodus 4:2. I love the story of Moses at the burning bush, Exodus 3 and 4. Great conversation that happened between Moses and God right there. Fantastic conversation. But there came a point when God asked Moses an intriguing question. It's just a simple question. Moses, what's in your hand? And Moses' answer was two simple words. A rod. A dead piece of lumber. A stick that I use as a shepherd. It's my rod, my shepherd's rod. I mean, why would you ask what that is? God, can't you see what that is? It's a rod. And God's next phrase, next command was, throw it down. But you don't understand, Lord, this is my shepherd's rod. This is what I use for protection. This is what I use to guide the sheep. This is important to what I do every day as a shepherd. This rod is very, throw it down. So Moses did. And you know what happened? Turned into a serpent. And the point is this. That dead piece of lumber became a picture of God's power for the rest of the story of Moses through the Exodus. In fact, after this incident, it was no longer called Moses' rod, it was called the rod of God. And Moses' rod wasn't intimidating. But when the rod of God went up in the air, you ducked under anything you could find because bad things were about to happen. When the rod of God went in the air, seas parted. When the rod of God hit the rock, water flowed. When the rod of God touched the Nile, it became blood. But it was just a rod. It wasn't until God took ownership of it. And so this morning, or this afternoon, I ask, what are you holding in your hands? Something God maybe is prompting you to let go of. Something He's asking you to trust Him with. Trust Him with. Will you keep it? This is my lunch. Will you keep it? Or will you put it in His hands? You may feel like what you have is not worth anything. But let me tell you what, in the hands of Christ, it can feed a multitude. But are you willing to give it? Are you willing to let it go? And it can be anything. Right now, everybody's thinking about money. No. It can be a relationship. It can be forgiveness. It can be a bitter spirit. It can be a multitude of things that you need to put into the hands of God that you're holding on to. Don't walk away from this conference hearing what God is doing, hearing the testimonies, observing the lives of missionaries. Don't walk away from this conference just observing and not participating. Step into it. Be a part of it. Don't miss this. That's the sermon title. Little boy, give your lunch to the Lord. Don't miss this. Don't miss this. Let Him have your lunch. You don't want to miss what's coming. And let me tell you something. Surrender, participate. Don't miss this. This may be the last missions conference we have this side of the rapture. Don't miss this. Don't let the opportunity go by. Let's stand with our heads bowed for just a moment. Father, as we come to the close of this conference, there's been so much we've heard this week. Videos we've seen, testimonies we've enjoyed, messages that have touched our hearts. But Lord, as we look at all of it and we boil it all down, Lord, I believe the one thing that you would be saying to us as your children is, don't miss this. Participate. Step out. Trust me. Just put it in my hands and trust me. Father, help us to see the privilege it is to be a part of what you're doing. And Father, please impress upon us that the hour is too late and this whole world is winding down. And as the prophetic clock nears midnight, we cannot afford to miss this. Bless now this time of invitation. In Jesus' name. I'm going to have just a moment of invitation. I want to encourage you, don't miss this. Don't miss the opportunity. Don't miss the chance to take what you think is nothing and see what God can do with it. Something the world would write off as insignificant. And God says, watch this. Just watch this. Just put it in my hands and watch this. It may be your ministry, it may be your Sunday school class. And God's saying, just put it right here. Trust me with it.